Are you saying that there's more government control because we've been trying to get it out?
No, of course not. What I'm trying to say is we're fighting against the unreal. We're dealing at the level of ideology right now, that government should go away and stay out of the economy. And we're talking as though in the United States we can determine our own future. For instance, if you take Japan, which has been the most successful competitor to the United States. They came from, frankly, nowhere a couple of generations ago to now have wages that are higher than ours. They produce superior products, and they've done this with very active government involvement. Maybe they were wrong to do that. Maybe they were right. Maybe, as Professor Friedman said, had the government butted out, they would have done yet better. The fact remains, if we say take the government out, it's like saying let's play football with sneakers and T-shirts and touch, which is a game I like. And the other guys are still using hard-shell helmets. You can't do it yourself.
That's the fundamental problem with your analogy is that the competition that we have in trade is not a competition in which somebody loses and somebody wins. It's a competition in which everybody wins. And this idea that the Japanese, that as a competitor to the Americans, that the Japanese in some sense won, is nonsense. Look at all the Japanese automobiles on American roads. Everybody who drives a Japanese automobile or uses a Japanese product is a winner as a result of this competition that there has been between the Japanese and the Americans for the sympathies of the American consumer. So it's quite wrong to take this sort of military or combative notion.
That might be right if the whole world did that sort of thing, and that Japanese consumers would have had the choice during the 60s and 70s to drive Fords or Volkswagens.
That's a fallacy.
They didn't.
A fallacy.
It's a fact.
Any individual country by itself, on the average, tends to benefit from free trade, regardless of what the other countries do.
What you seem to be saying when, in your argument against free trade is that the customer is always right unless they pick an imported item.
No.
And if they pick an imported item, then they require the help of the government to assist them, to tell them, look, you've made an unwise choice here, and therefore we're going to put a tariff or a quota on to prevent you from selecting the imported article, whether it's a Japanese automobile or a Korean television set or whatever, because you don't have the ability to make this kind of choice yourself.
That is not what I'm saying.
Well, what are you saying, Dr. Cohen?
I'm saying there's a problem here. We gain in the very short run. If we assume that this whole place is going to have an earthquake and we're going to be out of business in a year and a half, this is a brilliant idea. We send them paper, they send us cars. Let me finish. If, however, we go in the long run, the first round is Japanese semiconductors come in. Terrific. Let's even assume the Japanese are dumping them. They're subsidizing, they're pushing them into the market.
Absolutely.
The first thing, we get a lot of cheap semiconductors. Terrific. This wonderful fictional person called the consumer has a gain. However, the same person happens to be a producer. That's how he gets his income, to become a consumer. He's suddenly put out of business. Two things occur. Turns out you can't suddenly go back in the semiconductor business. That is, we've been put out, but we're going to rally and go back in. It takes a long time to develop the skills, the know-how, the scale. So you're pushed out of that business.
But Stephen, neither one of us knows what the future will hold. We don't know whether it's wise for us to accept these free or almost free semiconductors and use them and to develop our industries and so on.
We do.
But we can stand back and ask, what is going on? What are these Japanese who you apparently think know the future and are taking a competitive position that says, well, we're going to invest in subsidizing these things and shipping them to the United States to destroy their industry? Where are they investing? Where are they who take such a long-term view? They're investing in the United States. No. And they're investing in the United States because they realize that, for example, in the industry that you selected, the consumer electronics industry, they realize that anybody can make a VCR. But it takes a good, well-developed service industry, for example, to develop the software that's played on a VCR. And that's why they're buying, excuse me, that's
Nobody
why they're
buying
VCR
except the Japanese.
I
There
know.
are no American VCRs.
But who cares? Sony.
No,
Sony is just buying MGM.
Yes.
Sony is buying MGM because they realize that the product that's produced by a VCR is not the machine. That's a $200 item. There's a $1,000 item that's made up of the software, namely the films that are going to be played on that VCR, and they're investing in America because America produces the software.
Let me interject here for a second because I want to ask Dr. Friedman a question. Dr. Friedman, maybe VCRs aren't that important, but what about the defense industry? Should we really keep hands off there, or should we step in and protect?
Even Adam Smith made national defense an exception. But I think that while in principle it's an exception, in practice it's an excuse. I think one of the greatest statements I've heard about this whole problem was by Colin Clark, a famous economist, who said, you know, that people say that the trouble with that free trade is fine in theory, that's what Mr. Cohn is saying, but it doesn't work in practice. He says they're absolutely just wrong. It's just the opposite. Any half-baked graduate student can give you a half a dozen special cases for tariffs. Infant industry arguments, the problem of getting back in, the kind of thing you've mentioned, and so on. The trouble is that those arguments don't work in practice. In practice, we put on the wrong tariffs in the wrong places in the wrong way. The same thing is true of Japan. You're talking about Japan's great success. But let me ask you, does the average Japanese citizen, you say his wages are higher than they are in the United States. That's only because of an artificial exchange rate.
Quite.
There is no Japanese who will tell you that the standard of living in Japan is higher than the standard of living in the United States. It is not. And why not? Why not? Because of the Japanese protectionist policies with respect to rice and with respect to land. The average Japanese pays something like 6 to 7 times the world price for rice. We do the same thing in the United States. The average American citizen pays 2 to 3 times the world price for sugar. How does the United States benefit from that? We put on the once we adopt your policy, we move in a direction whose only outcome is a waste of national resources through centralized direction of our activities.
Germany's industrialization went like an express train all through that last quarter of the 19th century and the first part of the 20th century. German industrialization did not follow what was then the dominant ideology of free trade. It said, look, the British, well, please, come on. There was the marriage of rye and iron when Bismarck came in.
Well, but
they were targeted
industries. What was the first thing the Germans did?
They copied all the possible British technology.
They eliminated, no, but they first of all eliminated all their internal tariffs. I mean, Germany was
Germany formed its nation.
Yeah,
yes, within the nation, they opened up markets, and between the German nation and the rest of the world, they had lots and lots of trade. But they had targeted development. They had strategic policies, not stupid mass government inhibitions. They said, look, the future chemical industry, we go. We push resources and we help the chemical industry. We protect it for a while because the British are well ahead. They did the same thing in steel, chemicals, and machinery.
Yeah. But if you look at it...
nobody's ahead of the Germans in chemicals right now.
But if you look at it, the problem is that we lose our sense of perspective. By today's standard, what Germany did in the period you're talking about, we would today call free trade. They did
well, I don't know what we mean.
And that's exactly the same thing that you're doing with respect to Japan. You are not allowing for the extent to which Japan's... See, what happened in Japan was between 1914 and 1939, Japan shifted policy and became a highly protectionist, a highly centralized, a highly controlled, and its real income went down. In 1939, it went into war, and after the war, it did abolish. In fact, Japan, since World War II, has been much less of a centralized and protectionist state than it was between the wars.
That is probably very true, but
And
since
by
World War
comparison with the United States, by my judgments, the United States is every bit as protectionist as Japan is.
I'm not saying the United States is Snow White. I think we have a lot of protectionism, but we have stupid protectionism.
The question is there any other kind?
Yes, there is. Take a look at Japan, in post-war Japan. Take a concrete industry, automobiles, because they're important, and you can understand.
Which strategically, MIDI, don't forget, try to suppress. Don't forget that. When you're talking about this wonderfully intelligent policy pursued by the Japanese government, that they actively tried to suppress the exportation of automobiles because they felt that
the Japanese
government
has not batted 1,000 in its policy. I'd say they've been hitting about 465.
Well, I guess you use the example of automobiles.
1 minute, I will. Which a 465 hitter is Nobel Prize baseball.
But I don't believe they've been batting. I believe that the post-war development of Japan is a tribute to the force of free markets in opposition to MeToo, I think you cannot attribute it to meetings.
This is all true, but it has no concreteness. This is ideology. Let's look at
It is
automobiles.
not ideology.
Automobiles